And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Marie Antoinette Kelley, award-winning portrait artist who is the author and illustrator behind Danny's Day in Heaven, the first children's book to speak on the topic of near-death experiences. Marie Antoinette, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. I'm really delighted to be here.
What interested you in writing a children's book about NDEs?
Well, I felt that it was an important book to be out there. I mean, I have it here with me. I mean, you see the painting behind me too, but as a child, I was one of those sensitive kids that had a lot of spiritual experiences. And I mean, it was before, obviously in the 80s, before there was the internet and really the cultural merging where there's a lot more answers. But it left me feeling afraid and alone a lot, having these experiences that I couldn't explain. And so if I had known then what I know now, I felt like it would have been comforting. It would have given me a level of confidence that I still try and get to now as an adult. And I'm hoping to provide that for children around the world who are like me, having these experiences, and who would be reassured knowing that, it's a real realm, the spiritual realm, that isn't something we have to use wishful thinking for or imagine or poo-poo away for that matter. And so I wanted to introduce that to kids so they can have that platform to build on.
You mentioned that you had some spiritual experiences. Did you have an NDE?
No, the funny thing is that as a child, I was in touch with the other side, and I had, people that had passed away contact me and things like that. And I was raised in a religious household where that isn't really an accepted behavior almost. So I really didn't quite know what to do with it. And so growing up was, that was a challenge. That element of my upbringing was a challenge for me. And so as an adult, I ended up looking for answers and insights about my own, nature and my own experiences and how the world made more sense for me. And that led me to understanding that there are people out there who have had near-death experiences, and reading their books. For example, the first one that I ran into was the one of Daniel Brinkley, who I used as a reference for the children's book. But hearing his story, I distinctly remember just feeling the great relief of having people that had empirical evidence of dying and being resuscitated and coming back. Obviously, you know all about that because you have interviewed, you said, over 500 of them. And so just feeling that relief of the reality that it wasn't a belief system and it wasn't a set of rules, it wasn't a philosophy, it was an actual experience that people were having. And they were telling these stories in fascinating tales in their books, but for adults, such as Daniel's. Daniel's is a fascinating story. And you mentioned you've had him on your show. He was someone that got struck by lightning, and he was dead for 32 minutes and came back with a tremendous story. And so for me, it just really woke up my heart in realizing that I was not as weird as I had made myself feel, that I could access spiritual dimensions and feelings of people that were not in a body on the other side. And I had kind of, gaslit myself from my childhood about that because I didn't really know what to do with it. And I was taught that that was not really something you wanted to mess with. And so I had to deny a part of myself for a long time. And so finding people like Daniel and then reading ravenously all the books that I get my hands on about stories like that, about people that had gone to the other side, I started to feel like, that's where it was at, because everybody described, that realm that full of light and full of acceptance and colors, and it was more alive than it was here. And intuitively, I had touched on that. And so I knew the truth of that in my heart. And at the same time, not having really had the comforting foundation that was real, I was more afraid of it than I needed to be. And so in my own fear, I was attracting more negative experiences, the fearful ones and the ones with people with broken emotions and things like that were vibrating at a fearful level. And so I started to almost, glorify the experience of, pure heaven and pure spirit. And I started for 10 years or so, I started wishing, oh, if only I could go to the other side. I really don't like it here. And I realized I'm sure you come across that with other people, that you get a little bit depressed about the mundaneness of life that you live in, and the fact that there aren't any real answers, and then everybody who is just operating on automatic pilot kind of shuts down that spiritual inquiry and the real love that you feel when you get in touch with it. And so after about, I don't know, a good decade of just really just wishing to be on the other side, I actually had an experience where my son, we had a trauma birth. And it's funny how they say, be careful what you ask for, because you could receive it. But in that trauma birth, I had a chance to die. And it was, 60 seconds. I had an abruption and complications. And so I had 60 seconds to live. And in those 60 seconds, they were rushing me down the hall. There was all that chaos. And my husband had the bed, and he was trying to get me to the operating room, and they're trying to get an anesthetist and a surgeon, and everybody come together literally in the space of 60 seconds. And I was told later it was intense. They didn't have time to, for example, to get a surgery knife. They just used the blade, things like, really, it was very condensed time frame of, oh, here's my chance. And it's just like I had studied and, wished for. Almost that moment came where the peace enveloped me, and the chaos of everybody's frenzy to try and save my life and my baby's life was outside of that. And I recognized it so clear cut. I was like, here it is. And the funny thing is, I surprised myself very much, because having spent my life the way I did in really being sensitive to the spiritual realm, and then wishing, could I please be on the spiritual realm, because I didn't like the physical realm. I was so surprised by my own reaction when it was my time to say, hey, you can go ahead and access what you wished for. I clenched my fist and I said, hell no, I'm not going. And it was just the feeling that I was like, you don't need to prove it to me anymore. I'm good. I know, I've always known my whole life the truth of the spiritual realm, the truth of these experiences. It's only been my own psychology that was at odds with it, but not the fact that it exists. So all these things in that split second just kind of came together, and I was like, I want to live. And I clenched my fist, and I heard afterwards from the doctors, it took them 10 hours or so to bring me back. And obviously I made it through and I lived. And when I was back, I had lost over half of my blood. And so I was really faint and weak. But in that reset, again, I picked right up where I left off with what I had read in all these stories. I myself also now had that heightened intuition, that ability just to feel through walls and to have knowledge that you don't know where it comes from. And the only thing that didn't happen to me is the in-between was just a total blackout. From the before till after, there was this blackout where I didn't have that NDE that people wrote about in the book. But I also knew for me that was a reset, where I understood that I didn't need that NDE. What I needed to understand is that I had life. And it reset me at that moment from having wished that the other side was more available to me, that I was more, that I was actually kind of sad that I was on this side, on the physical side of things. It's reset me to a total appreciation how cool it is that we are alive, that we have the ability to create while we're here, and that it is fundamental to accept that spirit is the foundation of everything that inspires us and that we create with. But that was a total blessing to be here and to be in that role where I could participate and create. So it's funny that when my moment came, I wasn't interested at all in reality, and I just wanted to live. And I felt like that ever since. I felt so excited that I have reset, that I now know full well the truth of spirit, because ever since then, when I really made that connection, I've worked with it more closely than I allowed myself previously. At the same time, it totally cured me from that wishful thinking that could I please be on the other side, because I know my time will come when it's ready. And in the meantime, here I am able to create fun things such as this children's book.
During that birth trauma, were you having an out-of-body experience or seeing a tunnel or anything?
Well, I have had various experiences. See, I think what happened to me is having studied it so intensely, it became a mental concept in my mind that I started to project like a reality onto rather than allowing it to continue introducing itself to me as happened to me as a child. And so I can't say that I had an out of body experience, but at the same time, that may be because I interpret it from having studied it for so long that it has to be, A, B, C, and follow these steps. What I can say that is it was extremely intuitive. Like I could literally, um, you know, experience things outside my room and walk up with my husband um, up the elevator. I had never been in the hospital other than on a gurney and in that one room, but I knew exactly where he was going, and I could count down till he opened the door and come into the room. And so I had that clarity, but I've always been at odds with it within myself, with my literal mind that says, oh, it must look like this and this, because that's how people write about it. And at the same time, I'd have complete um, knowledge and understanding that you couldn't have in a physical body because it comes from your spiritual senses. So uh, I've always kind of been at war with myself about that. So I can't say that I had an out of body experience that the way they write about when you find yourself floating at the ceiling and looking down at your bed. No, but at the same time, I had spiritual gifts and awarenesses that were definitely not belonging to my body. They were part of my spirit. And all the way to understanding what needed to be happen to my body physically in order what kind of medical care I needed to get for my son, and just intuitive understandings that were just brought into me through my spiritual senses.
Do you still have the abilities that you got after that experience?
Yes, I do. They're slightly less strong because at that point I noticed, because we were obviously in the trauma setting, which was putting me more on the edge, I think, between life and death. And secondly, what I've come to realize, I had like 500 people from all different faiths praying for me. And I think all that sacred energy and that spiritual boost was really putting me into a vibration that allowed me to be really attuned. And I really enjoyed that. But I now still have a very sensitive understanding of soul language and the spirit. And I use that in my artwork a lot. And I do also have a lot of experiences in my dreams, for example, that I feel more part of me now than before that experience, because before that I was more divided about that's there and I'm here and how can I get there, and how, it was more like a separate world, like always trying to understand with my rational mind how it made sense. Now it's an accepted reality that I can relate to more intuitively.
Have you ever created art that looks like the tunnel of an NDE or what people see on the other side?
Well, I suppose I try to get some of that in this children's book. I mean, obviously, this is a little bit of an invitation. I have been through several layers of those paintings, and again, as I mentioned, I struggle with my left brain saying, well, if I haven't seen it firsthand, how do I know what it looks like? And I came to realize that spiritual senses are really rooted in your feelings, not so much in your physical facts that you get through your senses of seeing it as a particular shape. Or so what I did with my artwork is I tried to recreate the feeling that I feel when I get spiritually in tune. And so I came up with paintings like this of getting drawn into the light. And Daniel himself in his book mentions that when he went into the light, he went feet first. And so I painted the child in this book going into the light feet first, and just trying to capture the feeling of what the other side feels like. I've touched that feeling myself many times, and I agree that it is such an intense and profound, heightened experience that it's hard to capture it in the colors or in the shapes that I paint in. It's almost frustrating because you have to make it so much more dense than it actually is, that some of that euphoria, that the real vibrancy of it leaves as soon as you touch it to the page. But you can't just leave it white either. So I try my best to just make things vibrant and moving, and alive when I was painting. I have one painting in here with the sacred geometry, because that's one of my
like that one.
experience that, oh, thank you. Yeah. That's one of my personal experiences where I was, in one of my experiences when I really saw and felt the geometry of everything that vibrates and is energy and color. And so I try to make peace in this process between my left brain, my rational mind, and my intuitive experiences, and come up with a happy medium that kind of satisfies both sides of me.
Many parents have experienced their child ask them about death for the first time. How does this book open that topic up?
Yeah, that's exactly why I wanted to write the book, because it basically it's a very child-friendly story that introduces us to the idea that death is just a doorway. It isn't this brick wall that I used to feel towards it when I was a child, because the books that are out there that talk about death, they're really good about addressing the feelings of grief and how we can fill the void on this end, but none of them really take it beyond our physical reality. And that is where I feel children could really benefit, because if I think of myself and my children, and I now have grandkids too, that they're just fresh from heaven. They're so integrated still with the spiritual dimensions and the realities of their intuitive gifts, and they have to actually learn to get rid of all of that in order to fit into the physical realm. And I feel this book opens the discussion between parents and children to keep it alive, because if I had the context, I'm relating it to myself again, but if I had the context that the dreams that I had and the things that I experienced were really from the other side of ourselves, I believe at this point, having now an adult mind and understanding about these concepts, that spirit is to matter as yin is to yang, and that we have our physical selves, and then when we turn inward, we go into our spiritual selves. And so if we get those two languages to communicate properly with each other, then I think our lives could be so much more complete. And I think a parent who is attuned to that can use a book like this to begin that conversation with their children, so that it isn't such a separation where somebody's dead and we can only wish to see them again, and we can only tell stories about how it would happen. There's so many people now that I think the statistics are something like 1 in 25 Americans has had a brush with death and been resuscitated. And from your guests how spectacular their experiences are or can be when they are brought back and they retell the story of what happened to their souls. And so I feel personally very passionate, not just because of my background, but also because as a portrait artist, I suppose one of the areas that I enjoy most painting portraits is in the area where people have passed away. And that has taught me directly about the reality, other than being able to say, the near-death experience is one way to get in touch with the other side. But being in touch with people that have passed away and bringing their information back when you've never met them or you never really knew anything about them is a very convincing way to find out that there's more to life than this physical realm that, we exist in. And that's been satisfying.
Will children have had to overcome the fear of death before reading this book?
Oh, that's a good question. No, I think the opposite's true. I think if they are afraid, they're going to find the comfort in the book, because the words are very safe and friendly, and it is very much an accepted adventure. Of course, in the end of the book, Danny, who dies by a drowning accident, is resuscitated. So he does come back to, his body and continues his life as Danny. So that's going to help them understand the continuity of it a little bit without the physical loss of like a parent. But at the same time, it's so friendly and open that it really allows a child to find the continuum. And I think that takes a weight off their shoulders from what I've seen with my own children and the children that I have had the chance to introduce this book to, is they don't really have to give it too many more second thoughts. When they know that life goes on, it just takes a different shape. The physical reality is obviously important, but then beyond that, there's a spiritual dimension, and it's like going on vacation at that point. They can process in a way that keeps, I think, the continuum, and that's a very powerful feeling because it allows them to just park it a little bit until there's a new thought, and they don't have to just hit that brick wall like I mentioned earlier, that it's done. And you only had the 5 years that you were young to know this person, and you'll never, you missed your boat kind of feeling. Those feelings really stood out in my life when I was young, and this book is the exact opposite. It's very reassuring that life goes on, and those whom you love are not gone. They're in a spiritual dimension that you can still interact with, or at some point you will end up in yourself when your life completes itself, and you will meet them again.
Does your book also discuss reincarnation and coming back?
Well, not specifically. I have thought about that as another children's book, actually, because it's such a big topic. I mean, obviously, he leaves his body in his drowning incident, and then he returns to his body. So it opens the door to that topic, because if it's that effortless for him to re-enter his body, it's not a big jump to go to re-embodying in a new body altogether, like reincarnation. But I try and take one topic at a time, because I think, as we know with children, the sensitive topic is that everybody has their own belief system in their own home, and so I don't want to color the spiritual realm at that level. I want to stay as true to the understanding that we have now through empirical evidence, so that we can begin to understand death and what really happens to us from a foundation, so that we can then add our spiritual beliefs and our religious experiences to that in the privacy of our homes, and let the story be told through the understanding of the family. So obviously in the East, reincarnation is a natural ingredient, and on the West, there's still a lot of debate within the people that are Christianity, for example. They wouldn't accept that, but I'm trying not to color it at that level. I'm trying to stay to the basics that we now know for sure, that such as the people on your show have come back to tell, this is what happens. The scientists that are studying it, such as Dr. Raymond Moody, I understand you just had him on your show as well. They're finding the common ground. They're finding that independent of cultural background or spiritual beliefs, these elements of the death experience are starting to show up as part of what we can all expect when we die. And when I wrote this book, it's those elements that I highlighted, because I wanted to make that part of the foundation of upbringing of a child, so that the rest, which is the subjective experience of how we all individually relate to life, can be added by the parents to the life they want to live with their children. But I didn't want to be constantly going back to square one, which is kind of what I feel our society is doing, like with the science being so prominent and everybody wanting to prove everything physically. They keep going back. Is it real? Is it not real? And it's an obsolete conversation at this point. There's too many people that know spirit's real, and it's not out there for kids. And I was like, let's get kids on that page so that they don't have to ask those questions anymore. They could simply build, it's like, oh, this is real, and this is what happened to me. And we can take it to the next level, but they can begin bringing information back for us that we can build on.
Almost like trying to physically prove if somebody loves another person.
Yeah, because that's a good analogy. I've had the struggle within myself, but then also finding out the benefits of letting go of the struggle of, is it real, is it not real, and just allowing it to teach you, allowing that spiritual voice inside of you to kind of take you where it wants to take you, to follow the clues, is really nice. And I found that the comfort of that is now really a part of my life. And that's what I'm hoping to impart to children in this children's book, so that they can grow up with that comfort of having the guidance of the spiritual realm. In this book, there's when Danny drowns, he meets his spiritual guide, who's an angel. And that, for example, is one concept right there that so many children have. They have an awareness of that, somebody that is their sidekick kind of on an inner dimension, and they can't prove it to anybody. And, in the mainstream, they would get that, explained away as a figment of their imagination. Well, we all know it's more than that. And so that very simple fact right there, we allow a child to just see that in the book and work with that, they can begin building on that comfort.
It would be interesting if the guide that Danny met was also his invisible friend that he had when he was a toddler.
You mean like on the other side?
Right, because sometimes children have invisible friends, and maybe they are just imagination, and maybe some of them are their guides or some other beings communicating with them from the other side.
Yeah. In the book, I had Danny meet up with his teacher from second grade, but the story is that she passed away already. So he's meeting somebody that has already, left their physical body. But I myself, for example, in my dreams, I have had like lucid dreams where I've met with people, my friends, and they would tell me information. That one of them comes to mind, my friend. She was out of touch with me for about 3 years, and then she shows up in my dream and she's telling me that she's getting divorced. And in that dream, I was processing that information, and I got really angry with her. And I said, that is not what you want. You are, taking the wrong path there. You want to get back to your heart. And I started telling her what I, in that dream, felt she really wanted. In order to have that breakthrough of love in her heart, she needed to stay where she was and face the challenge within the relationship. And then I woke up. And I was like, what was that? I was like, that was way too real for me to think that that was a dream of mine. There was information there. And so I remember wondering what to do with that information. And 3 weeks later, I told you I wasn't in touch with that friend for about 3 years. 3 weeks later, she calls me out of the blue, and she says, oh, hi, I'm sorry. I meant to call somebody else. I called the wrong number. I said, no, you didn't call the wrong number. I feel this is the moment where I need to tell you something that happened to me. So I launched into telling her what happened in the dream, and she listened, and she goes, oh my gosh, I am on my way to the lawyer right now to sign the divorce into paper. So she was like on that moment. So those moments, and then so we had a long talk on the phone. She canceled the divorce proceedings, actually, based on this experience. And then we had several more long talks after that, and she started doing some healing work, and she turned the whole ship around, and she actually is still married today, happily married. And the whole thing was such a beautiful experience for both of us, orchestrated from spirit. And I suppose the reason I'm bringing that up is because of what you said. If a child could ever have that experience, I think we do have that experience. And I think that's one of the motivations that made me write this book, is that we can't really normally talk about it. It still has to be this like wow phenomenon that, oh my gosh, look at what happened. When we raise our children with a foundation that spirit's real, and this is what we already know, when we die, we don't really die. We change from our physical selves to our spiritual selves, and life goes on in amazing ways. And there's people that can tell you about it, but as a foundation, we know this to be true. Then they can build and they can start trusting when the experiences happen to them. That's really where I'm feeling the benefit for myself as well, because I'm still in that bracket, but I'm like, wow, look at what happened to me. Because as a child, I discredited all my experiences, right? I didn't know, and I felt weird. And so part of me is still saying, I'm not weird. And I don't want that discussion anymore. I want it to be natural. I want to say, okay, I'm getting information the same way you get it through Wi-Fi or through your text. I'm getting information from my spirit, and this is what it's saying. And I'm getting to that point now as a grown-up, and I'm using that in my artwork. But I feel that could have been part of a childhood upbringing.
I don't want to give your whole book away, but basically, Danny drowns. He goes to the other side. He meets his spirit guide. In the end, how does he come back? Is it just automatically, or is he offered a choice? Or is he told it wasn't his time and was forced to go back?
Yeah, I use that as well from the examples that I had gotten from the near-death stories that I studied. But in the end, he is sad that he has to leave because it isn't his time yet. And now that he has got a more mature understanding in his heart of what he can do with himself, he gets sent back for a second chance. Because that's another thing that I felt was really important to convey to people, is that when you are not aware of the reality of your spiritual self and the spiritual existence, so many of us feel shut down, and we don't really participate in our own lives. We just kind of go on that automatic pilot, and we're bored with life and what it has offered us. It's kind of depressing, really. And so he's a bully in the book before he gets to the other side, because he's kind of in that same position. He doesn't really understand the power of his heart and how much fun it is when you create from a place of love and potential. And so he gets shown that on the other side. And so at the end of the book, he doesn't actually want to go back. Just like anybody who touches the other side is so euphoric, that feeling is where you really feel alive. Like Daniel says, this is where we are right now in our bodies. This is as dead as you're ever going to be. I feel that way. I've confirmed that for myself, having touched the other side through my spiritual experiences and having them be so profound that I wish to be on the other side. And so he is also going through that same feeling. But then he gets sent back with the message that he is a powerful spiritual being that can create with all the love in his heart, and that life will be fun when you participate at that level.
How long has your book been out for?
Since June.
Have you read the book to children, like at a school or a library? And if so, what was their reaction?
I've read it to the children in my world, and it was adorable. I find that they go through it really fast, and they are really, and the children that I read it to are young. They were up to 8 years old. And so there wasn't any follow-up discussions, but it was total acceptance. The little ones were going, oh, it's Golden Land. Oh, look, it's Golden Land again. And look, there's Nana. And I realized it was a confirmation for me how natural it was for them to recognize these elements as an extension of their reality. Life isn't just the physical world around them when they're little. And so this book confirms that. They were very natural about it. It was just complete acceptance and that same bright, bubbly, joyful energy that I tried to capture in the illustrations. So it was very, very natural.
Do you think we should do away with the word death and replace it with transition or something else?
Well, a good question again. I have a little bit of all of those words going on. I definitely, when I talk about a person, I don't really talk about them as dead, because having touched them when they're still alive on the other side, they're obviously not dead. But I think it's important to keep the word death for our physical experience, because their body's dead, their body is definitely gone. And so what I've come to understand is that grief, for example, is obviously very meaningful and important to acknowledge, but it's definitely a language of the body, and that we do benefit from understanding it. Its limitations belong to the body, because on the other side and on the spiritual realm and in that oneness of our spirits, there is no grief. There's just that coming together, and that's that understanding each other and that feeling of life that wins every time. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that that grief and death are real, but they belong to the physical realm. It's part of how we let it go, how we say goodbye to it. But that transition is also real, because it's our souls that transition into the spiritual realm, and we take on that other form and we continue. So I raised my own kids with that understanding from both sides, because I don't think it helps to deny the fact that we experience this, but there's a place for it. But then there's a place for the language of our hearts too.
All right, behind you are two paintings. One is the cover of the book, and the other is a peacock. Is this peacock in the book as well?
No, I just picked the colorful background, and for me, the peacock is significant for me because, as I mentioned earlier, that I had a lot of spiritual gifts as a child, and I felt awkward with them, so I kind of formed a bad habit of apologizing when I draw on these gifts, and so I do a lot of my own growing by talking through spirit, and I got a spiritual prompting to paint the peacock as an exercise to understand that peacocks, they strut their stuff, they show their colors, and they show who they are without any vanity, without any second guessing that, they are being egotistical or anything, or frauds, or any of the, the negative voices in my head. And I call that painting celebration. And it's a reminder to me to celebrate that we're here to share our gifts, and that we shouldn't, like you said, it's a safe space to share that we have unexplained phenomena, but we shouldn't have to apologize that these things are happening to us, because we're just here to experience life together, and let's celebrate. So it's my personal reminder.
Well, it looks fantastic.
Thank you.
Have you seen UFOs?
I did as a kid, actually. As a kid, I don't have positive experiences with UFOs myself. As a kid, I had several weird and unexplained phenomena with UFOs. One time I felt really, it's a difficult topic for me because it felt very out of control and very intimidating. And it was part of that cycle where I didn't have spiritual mastery over my gifts, so that I didn't really feel I knew what was going on, or where this energy was coming from, or who was taking over my thoughts. And that's where I had my experiences. There was the UFOs that I have talked to were like, I call them UFOs, but they were like high-pitched frequency, really fast-speaking information, and it's not something I enjoy thinking back on. I actually remember that I felt very soothed when I started studying the world's religious traditions and getting some of the methods to strengthen myself spiritually, like sacred mantras and yoga and prayers. And I started feeling like all those exercises started sealing my aura, and I was able to leave behind some of those exercises or some of those experiences, because it's not something that I actually enjoyed having happen to me. It left me feeling vulnerable.
What about orbs? Have you seen those?
Yeah, what I found mostly is that I've dialed my spirituality into an internal experience. And when I had these experiences with orbs, I was looking more outside of me for understanding. And that was a phase that I found was more intimidating to me. Right now I'm going to the feeling level. I guess it's just the way I'm maturing in my own spirituality. But if I validate something in my feelings, then I find it opens up in my sight. And if I see like an orb, then I go into my feeling world, and I find out that it's usually just a person trying to send me a message or a communication. And then I take it into my artwork and let my feelings talk. And so I take it away from like experiences out there to more like an internal communication of what my feelings are telling me. And so that's kind of where I'm now having my experiences. And I have, like in my artwork, for example, a feeling that I'm being guided to trust my feelings more rather than my experiences or my thoughts. And for example, my paintings that I'm doing from the people that I'm creating portraits of, they are teaching me things about like what happens on the other side. And that's the kind of thing that then really piques my interest. And then I try and learn about those things. So I'm more fascinated with those experiences.
You also illustrate other spiritual or paranormal things like an oracle deck, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The way I did that is the same thing. I have that angel deck here. I painted 44 paintings in here what I did again is what I felt was really important in my own discovery is that our spiritual language is available to all of us through the internal connection that frees up that whole channel, that conversation with the other side. And this angel deck paintings are each like messages how to get past any of the hurdles or obstacles that we have inside of us so that we can get that communication as clear as possible. And so it deals with, raising your vibration, for example, or getting over guilt or it's more of a deck that deals with like the psychology of our internal perspective so that we can get to the place where we get free and feeling the inspiration. And so I did that in this book.
And you
Karen Noe is the author of it. She is a angel medium from New Jersey, and she has written the messages for it based on her experiences with angels and her guests.
Can you show us some of your favorite cards?
Sure. Yeah, I have some of artwork here. I have a series. I did this painting, for example, is in there. This is for me an important one because it's the yin yang, obviously more in a three-dimensional setting. Because I feel like life is so much about finding the balance between equal and opposite, and that's how I relate to the spiritual realm as well. That if you go all spiritual realm, then people tend to get ungrounded, and everything seems to be almost too great of a story to understand. And if they get too earthy and they get too physical, then it's like, where's the magic and the spirit of it? So I felt that was one of the paintings. I have this painting is in there as well. This is a story that of overcoming addiction. Somebody that is really feeling the pain of the burden of the physical body, learning at the same time how her soul is completely in the hands of God, and then feeling the breakthrough. I have, like I said, what was hard for me in my artwork is that I tended to second guess myself a lot as I'm doing right now, because I feel a little, self-conscious about, showing these things and feeling like.
Well, you shouldn't, because you are very talented and stuff is amazing.
Thank you. Well, I try to really bring my heart to the paintings. And so when a person asks me, can I paint somebody that has passed away, I just get to work looking for the facts, obviously, on where the features and how is the face needing to be represented. And so I got this painting as a commission from somebody. And so I just painted him exactly as he looked. But as I was painting him, I felt a very strong prompting. This is the beginning when I really started trusting that there was another voice trying to be part of the paintings. And it wasn't just the facts that the painting had to look proportionate and all the features needed to be in the right place. There was more to it. And so when I was painting him, I felt like, I only had this one picture, and it's just a snapshot from him at the wedding. And as I was looking at it, I started to feel this really happy personality, just a strong sense of joy coming from him. And I felt it immediately took me into the stars. And I was just outgrowing that feeling of having to do everything right and meticulously. And I wanted to be a little bit more expressive. So I said, you know what, I'm going to paint him in the stars, because he feels like he's just so full of laughter and in the stars. And I remember, again, that was part of that journey of mine where I had to get over myself, because I get in my own way with my just really that kind of thinking that makes everything literal. And so I tried to paint him. And as you can see, I painted him in the stars, or at least what I thought was a very star-filled energy. And as I painted him, I started to feel like I needed to put John Denver music on. And I was just playing, it's just one person in one artist in my database, but I just felt compelled. I had to play it had to be that music. And I got really into it, and I started singing all these songs, and the phrases started to wake up, and they were all about how I love my lady. And it dawned on me at that point that I had left behind my own, fact-based approach to painting. And I was definitely now feeling this person. And I actually, on a whim, I wrote a message to the lady that I commissioned this portrait, and I didn't know her. And she said, and I wrote her in the message that I felt at this point that I was getting a communication from Michael, the man she had commissioned me to paint, and that he was telling me through the songs, through all these different phrases, how much he loves his lady and how much he missed her, but he was still very much part of her life through the love that he felt for her. So I wrote that in the message, I sent it off. And sure enough, the email came back to me saying, oh, she was in tears when she received that message, because every morning, unbeknownst to me at 10 a.m., she took their 4 doggies for a walk, put on her John Denver music, and cried the whole time, missing him so much. And I realized he wasn't, she wasn't missing him, she was feeling him. And that's when she realized there was a ceiling over her experience where she just thought, from her point of view, there was this empty space, and John Denver helped her understand the love that she has lost. Where, 800 miles away, me not knowing him, is John Denver's music that he used to get through to me to tell her how much he loved her. And so then it dawned on me that he was part of this painting. And so I got a little bit more confident about the fact that I wanted to put him in the stars and that he was laughing. And I said, well, what do you make of that? And she goes, oh, that's easy to understand. She goes, because he had cancer and he knew that he was dying, and he planned his own memorial. And she said, I didn't share this with you either, but the memorial poem that he wanted me to read was from The Little Prince. And I have it right here, and it says, in one of the stars I shall be living, in one of them I shall be laughing. And so it will be as if all the stars are laughing when you look at the sky at night. And I realized that it was one of these wonderful confirmations for me that he was communicating from the other side to me, with me trying too hard to understand and get myself to feel what really was just effortless, because he had said that emotion before he died. And he was simply sending the confirmation back to her that that's where he was now. And that's how he wanted to be painted. And so that was one of my first beautiful experiences, that there was so much more to the artwork that was at the same time a very simple message, a message of continuity, that life goes on, and here's your proof. And then I had another story like that, very similar, and I feel these are happening to me just to build that same voice that just says, it's not complicated to be in touch with spirit. But this was a couple that had lived near me for a while and then moved away, and for 8 years or so completely lost touch with them. And then I heard through the grapevine that he had passed, and the lady was left behind. She lived in Denver at the time. And so I decided, I'm going to make a painting for her. I'll just help her commemorate the loss of her husband, so that the grief is a little bit easier to handle. So I got to work, and I felt like, oh my gosh, this is so important. I need to do it right now. And then as I got ready, I was like, I need to plan this painting out with all the colors and the whole color scheme. And I had never done that before, because I had been more of an impromptu painting. Once I got the picture, I just got to work, and trying to stay ahead of that critical voice inside of me, I just usually get to work. But in this case, that critical voice was calmed down very precisely, and it allowed me to lay out the whole color palette. And I thought to myself, this is a really interesting experience for me, because I remember Stephen was a very precise person who had a very meticulous attention to details. So was my first clue that I was obviously now no longer alone in this portrait either. So I decided to just go with it and connect with Stephen in his spirit. And immediately I would feel that connection. And at night, as I was working on this portrait in the daytime, at night, I would feel that I could travel with him, and I would see in my inner sight, I would see him reach out his hand to me and try and take me through the universe and try and take me to mystical places. And I remember he had his wife with him in that soul space as well. And I said, no, I distinctly remember the impression, no, that's for you to show her, because that's such an intimate journey that you both need to be part of without me. So I declined the invitation, and I came back and I woke up and I finished the painting. And so when I finished the painting, I sent it to her, and she said, oh my gosh, this is my postcard from heaven. I said, what do you mean? She goes, when Stephen was dying, he had been a very spiritually inclined person, but as he got closer to the end, he started to doubt his spirituality and the things he had always believed in. And the fears of his body started taking over. And he said, I'm not sure if I'm actually going to live on. What if that was only for me to cope with my life? If I find that I'm still alive on the other side, then I'll send you a postcard. And she said that that's what he had done. He had found someone willing and able to create that postcard and send it to her. So I realized that I had been part of a profound spiritual communication between two people again, that I had no conscious awareness of knowing. So it's experiences like that that started to build my confidence in the language of spirit, just being a very practical influence in my life as I was creating my artwork. And the language was always the same. It was always about the love going on and the fact that there's perfection, there's continuity, there's answers, there's healing, there's beauty, and it's trying to get through into our world. And it's still so hard to get through because we so rely, especially for myself as well, we so rely on the rational understanding and explanations of science or knowing things for sure before we really let go and flow with it. And so I found that in myself, I found that in my artwork, even when I had these experiences, that fear that initially woke up in my childhood, that what I was experiencing wasn't true or wasn't good, and I had no foundation for, which I obviously was the reason for creating the book, so that children don't have that problem. But for me, that fear was constantly putting me back to saying, oh, well, what if it was just my subconscious mind? What if I was just, wishful thinking? And so I kept asking the questions, can I please just know for sure? So one day, these things always happen to me by surprise, but then I realized that the answers always come. And so a friend of mine said, would you mind creating a sketch of a friend of mine? She said, you don't know him, but he's in the hospital and I'd like to cheer him up. And I said, sure, I'm happy to, because I created charcoal sketches quickly that I call portraits of the soul in order to keep my skills up. And so I said, I'll just sketch him and I'll send it to you. Well, I started sketching him, and what would have been an easy exercise of just getting the features in place and getting the face to be expressive turned into a really difficult burden, because what happened is, as I tuned into him, that spiritual language came in and it started to take over, and I started feeling this tremendous weight on him, this tremendous weight of just hard feelings and self-doubt and anger and just the heaviness of life that hadn't been shifted by the inspiration and the love of his heart. And I realized I couldn't get him on paper. And that's something that's a pet peeve of mine that really frustrates me, when I can't get to the soul of a person, because I think that's really what makes life worth living, is that we're here, sharing the gifts of our soul. And so that's one of the things I like to capture in the portraits, so that you can look at your soul and be reminded of your awesomeness. And I couldn't get that awesomeness in there. So I said, I can't let this go. I got to feel my way through this. And so as I started feeling through these layers of burden on him, I have this little ritual with it when I just offer them up in prayer, so that I don't let them just, get the last word in. And so I started, feeling these feelings and offering them up in prayer, and they started leaving him. And I started to understand more of who he was and how he had ended up in that gloomy place, or that angry place. And at the end of that exercise, it was quite a few hours actually, but time kind of disappears when I'm in that space. I connected with his soul. I could feel the light turn on, and I could feel the levity come back to his heart, and I could feel that his own soul had kind of like emerged. And immediately the light turned on in the portrait, and he landed in the sketch. And so I was really satisfied. And I ended up sending that sketch to my friend and saying, here he is, I've got this. And I had some profound spiritual experiences of his inner world that I shared a little bit with her, but I summarized them, and I said, I feel they're lifted now, and here he is. And so she took that sketch to him in the hospital, and he ended up being really happy with it, because it made him aware of his own loving kindness again. He found it in himself because he saw it in his own eyes looking back at him. And so it was satisfying for all of us around. And then I didn't think anything else of it, and I just let it be. And then 6 weeks later, I heard that he had passed away. And I thought, oh, that's weird, because it almost felt like it was some sort of spiritual healing that his soul got so light, and I felt like healing can happen from that place. Ended up that he died. And so I said, I'm surprised about that. She says, yeah, well, if you don't mind, his wife wants to call you just because she's missing him and she wants to hear your experience with the sketch. So she called me and we talked about it. And I talked about what I went through with him and the burdens that I felt. And it felt very much like he had worn a lot of masks, and that he had been a salesman, and that he had been weighed down by all these masks that he had to wear, and the way he had to navigate life, couldn't keep his heart open. So she confirmed all that. He had been a salesman and he had exactly had those struggles. And what she said was so beautiful is that at the end of his life, he really had connected with his heart. So the portrait had really shifted his perspective, from the spiritual realm, really, from me touching the spiritual realm and then the spiritual realm touching his heart. He had gone to this place in his heart, and he had had a very satisfying ending to his life, where he had connected from his heart with all the people he loved. And they had used that sketch in his memorial service because they all wanted to remember him that way. And I suppose, the long story short, the reason I'm telling you all of this is because that night I left that phone call with a very grateful heart, because it was a beautiful assignment I've had and to be part of. But that night, I went to sleep with that happy heart. And in the morning when I woke up, I heard a man singing in my head. And he was singing a cappella in kind of like in a 4-part voice. It was a rich voice that was richer than a human voice, kind of like how they talk about Tibetans can sing in 3 tones at the same time. But there was no other music. But I heard the words very distinctly, and it was singing about the snow was on the roses. And so I was trying to capture that final phrase as I was waking up, and I knew that I hadn't been creating this song because it was too real. But I also knew that I didn't know the song, so I couldn't identify it. So I got on YouTube before I got out of bed, and I immediately found the song. It was Sonny James who wrote "Snow is on the Roses," and it was from 1963, and it came with a lot of music. Obviously, it wasn't a cappella, but I knew immediately that was the song I had heard. So I got out of bed and I said, guess what happened to me? I said to my husband, I said, somebody loves me so much, they're singing me a love song about snow is on the roses. And my husband goes, well, I don't know Sonny James. And I was like, well, I didn't know what to think of that. So I kept asking, well, who could possibly be singing this to me? Who knows Sonny James? And I asked some of the people in my world. Nobody knew Sonny James. And so I realized, it dawned on me that I was reluctant to admit that song wasn't for me at all. That song was, I started to realize that I had been in touch with this man whose name was Bob from the other side, because my attention had been so on him from the day before, and my heart had been so full with gratitude from having been part of his, transition and having that resolution in his heart. So it occurred to me that it was Bob singing, and that I needed to get this message to his wife. And I didn't know she was a traditional person, and so I didn't know if she was even open to hearing a message from her husband from the other side. So it took me 5 days to kind of work up the courage to just cold call her and say, hey, guess what? And so I did actually then end up calling her, and I said, I wanted to share something with you that happened to me. And just before I get started, I have a question. Do you know Sonny James? And she goes, oh, yeah, he was one of my favorite singers. And so she was the first one in those 5 days that knew Sonny James. So that was my confirmation then to stop overthinking it like I tend to do, and share with her the story. So I said, I know that I have no idea how this will come across to you, and I know it wasn't invited, but this is what happened to me. And I feel that your husband is saying his song of love for you in my head that Saturday morning to get through to you that he hasn't died. He only left his physical body because he's still alive. And he is telling you through this song that all is well. So she said, well, let me listen to the song. So she called me back a half an hour later crying. And she said she listened to it over and over again because the song described the day that he had passed away, when she had paid attention that the first snow was on the flowers outside, and the song was "The Snow is on the Roses," and she remembered. She said they weren't roses, she said, but they were the flowers outside. And then the story talks about how the bluebird flew away, but our love will last forever. So she knew the message was specifically for her, and it was a super healing message for her, obviously, to get the confirmation. And then we were both happy again. So the next day, she called me back again and she said, I did a little bit more digging. She said, and I found that Sonny James himself died on the birthday of my husband. And so that was like such a perfect confirmation at that point that that I remember distinctly when that story happened to me. That was the end of me second guessing that it was my subconscious generating information just because I wanted people to feel better and I didn't want them to grieve so hard because I believe in the other side. It wasn't anything like that because I'd never met Bob and I didn't know his wife and I didn't know what their story was. But yet it was all coming through crystal clear through a song that I never even heard. And so, the facts that this Sonny James died on the birthday of her husband. I mean, these were so obviously beyond the realm of chance or me projecting anything on it that I realized how beautiful life can be when we allow the voice of spirit and when we allow these inspirations that are subtle to just be part of our life without having to burden ourselves the way I used to always do, that I had proof or second guess. And again, that's the sort of story that I have to tell that brings me to the reason why I wrote this children's book, Danny's Day in Heaven. We need to start accepting that this is the foundation of our physical reality so that we can make better choices and have more love and just live a fuller life, I feel.
So if people want to learn more or check out your artwork, can they go to a website?
I have a website. Yeah, it's makfineart.com. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook with that same handle, makfineart. And so I am in the process of writing some of those stories on there. You'll find my artwork on there. You'll find the book on there. But the stories, I'm still just realizing that I've been kind of reluctant about sharing them, but I'm happy to talk to people about it if they want to drop me a line or send me an email.
All right. How should they contact you?
My email is idraw@makfineart.com.
Well, Marie Antoinette, before we wrap it up, can you give us one last positive message?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I feel that together we are so able to describe the fantastic potential of our lives with spirituality, with love, with all these mysteries from the other side. And I'm only trying to contribute my little bit here with this book, but I'm hoping that we can all just continue the journey and our conversations and that we can support each other in these experiences that are, mystical, mysterious, and somewhat unexplained still, because we're just reinventing it all over again. And I'm wishing that we can support each other with that. And I look forward to hearing from any and all of you who have experiences that you want to share with me. And perhaps we can write more children's books.
Marie Antoinette, thank you for your message and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you for having me on, Jeff.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.